All right. I believe we are live.
Let's go.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Frank. Welcome, Kyle. We'll give you a proper intro in just a second. But welcome to everybody else who is just tuning in right now. Once again, for our weekly edition of Capital Gains, brought to you by myself, Julian Fahrer, founder of Bitcoin Laws, Mr. Frank Corva, 2 seats to my left or right, depending on your orientation, political correspondent at Bitcoin Magazine, and Kyle Olney from SaveOurWallets.org. Welcome, Kyle.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
Yeah. Well, Frank, do you want to let everybody know a little bit about your connection to Kyle and how we got to here, and then we'll
Totally. Yeah, appreciate that. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us. Kyle is doing the Lord's work, if you will, in trying to raise awareness around very important language in the Clarity Act, which is the market structure bill, which is essentially next on the docket for the Senate. So we just saw a recent Senate draft of this bill come out with some very important language in it. That language came from the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, and it had a lot to do with protecting peer-to-peer rights, protecting the right to not only use non-custodial tools, but protecting the developers, purveyors, providers, et cetera, of those tools. So some of the language I would say is very much in response to what we saw this summer with the Tornado Cash trial, with the Samurai Wallet case, and we don't want to see this happen again. So for all of you out there who want to call me, I'm sorry about the language here, status cuck or whatever for covering politics and all this, I don't like seeing developers go to jail, and I like using Bitcoin in a non-custodial manner. So that's what we're doing here. Yes, exactly. That's what we're doing here today. We want to give Kyle some space to talk a little bit about this campaign. He's joined forces with Bitcoin Policy Institute and other Bitcoin advocates and advocacy groups. So let me stop it there. Kyle, please tell us about the campaign, some major takeaways, and maybe a little call to action if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again for having me on to talk about the campaign. I'm here in New York City right now. Last night, we just launched the Satoshi Needs You viral marketing campaign at the Coin Center Gala, trying to bring more exposure to this issue and make Bitcoiners all over the country aware of what's going on. We founded Save Our Wallets earlier in the year, as you just mentioned, as an organizing vehicle to really promote the BRCA language that was being discussed. Originally, it was its own standalone bill. It's since been incorporated into the Clarity Act, and it passed the House, and as you just mentioned, Frank, is now being debated in the Senate. And at the moment, that's good news that we have, strong developer protections that are being contemplated by the Clarity Act. But over the summer, as you also mentioned, the DOJ prosecutions against the developers of open source, non-custodial technology like Samurai Wallet and Tornado Cash were prosecuted, and the government was able to secure convictions and plea deals in both of those cases. And that was a very concerning development for the entire crypto ecosystem, but I think particularly dangerous for the Bitcoin ecosystem, because if we lose our ability to transact peer-to-peer and non-custodially, that kind of kills the entire purpose of the technology, right? And so when we saw those DOJ prosecutions start happening, and we observed that a lot of Bitcoiners in physical spaces where we meet up with them were not engaged with this issue, didn't realize what was going on and kind of the severe risks that we're running here. We decided at Save Our Wallets that we needed to come up with some kind of a viral marketing campaign, get it out there, make people aware, and then kind of get Bitcoiners all over the country engaged in pushing Congress to make sure that these rights that we've enjoyed for the last 15 or 16 years don't disappear overnight by the stroke of a pen, the way that Congress sometimes does at the 11th hour.
Yeah, appreciate that. A lot of very reputable figures and groups are behind what you're doing. I know the team from BPI is obviously super behind it, but the likes of developers like Matt Corallo, other devs who are very concerned about the direction in which we're headed. So, I've posted a piece on this for Bitcoin Magazine last night, and I get all sorts of responses to stuff like this. They're very special, a lot of them. A lot of, why don't you just buy off the politicians and do that? It's like, because if I told you my salary as a journalist, you would understand that I can barely buy a cup of coffee, much less politicians. No, I'm just kidding. No shade on David Bailey there. But anyway, what can people do here? There are sort of gradients for what they could do in terms of their engagement with their elected officials, maybe senators in particular. What are the most impactful things that they can do?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick list of things. So the first thing, as we mentioned, is that this is currently being debated by the Senate. So the most important thing, if people are going to pick up the phone and call their congressperson today, they should call their senators and let their senators know that this language, the BRCA language, is incredibly important to them as constituents, and that they will be watching to see whether or not their representatives are supportive of that, and they will make sure that there's a consequence to be paid if their representatives are not supportive of that. That's the most, I guess, timely or time-sensitive thing that people could do. But generally, I would also want to point everybody at saveourwallets.org, where we have a bunch of information about the campaign. We have the actual graphic assets that you can share, in one click from there. And I would say that promoting this campaign to other Bitcoiners, both digitally on social media and then also in the physical spaces where Bitcoiners meet and congregate, is very important. We're trying to, basically get everyone who is, kind of active Bitcoiner exposed to this campaign and make them aware, because we are the strongest political coalition in the United States today, arguably. We swayed the last election. And if every Bitcoiner who is listening to this right now just picked up the phone and actually held their representative's feet to the fire, then we can win, and we can secure these rights, and we can ensure that the law very clearly, is in our favor in a way that, we've been really struggling, I guess, with the recent DOJ prosecutions to make clear to the government.
I think Kyle, sorry if I could just jump in. How do you think about this BRCA language right now? It's part of the Clarity Act, but how do you think about its relationship to the Clarity Act as a whole? And we know, I think, as you mentioned, that there's been some discussion behind the scenes, maybe even some effort to kind of separate it again from Clarity. How should Bitcoiners feel, I suppose, in a general sense, about market structure legislation passing without this language? How should people think about how and when to support this legislation?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. Thanks for asking it. I think the challenge that we have here is that the political system in the United States is gotten very complicated in recent decades. The way that these pieces of legislation happen, there are these giant omnibus bills that nobody's read. They're just kind of relying on, lobbyists and, other, special interest groups to kind of tell them, okay, which way should I go? In a lot of ways, we're calling this the Schrodinger's bill. So at the moment, the BRCA language is the most important language. If you're a Bitcoiner, the BRCA language is almost exclusively what we care about in the Clarity Act, right? The overwhelming majority of the Clarity Act otherwise is about DeFi, tokenomics, like what is a security, what's not a security, new Howey test, these sorts of things, which are important for the broader kind of crypto coalition. But in the Bitcoin universe, if we lose access to non-custodial open source software development, we lose our ability to transact and freely. And if we lose our ability to transact freely, there's really no point to this technology anymore, I would say, arguably. And so, the real danger that we're running is that a single senator like Elizabeth Warren could filibuster a bill coming out of the Senate that includes the BRCA language until they strip it out. And that could happen both in the individual Senate bill, which is, again, currently being debated, but this could also happen at the end of the process when the bill goes up for a final vote following the conference committee and, kind of what they are able to agree between both parties. And so the real danger and the real reason that we're trying to get Bitcoiners all over the country engaged in this issue now is that we may need to flip from strong advocacy of this bill in order to get the BRCA language ensconced in law to, militant, opposition to actually kill the bill at the 11th hour,
Yep.
if it turns out that they, try to renege on the campaign promises that had been made over the last year. And, we find ourselves in a situation where, no law would be better than bad law.
Yeah. What you've got, the call to action here, which I think is great and the right one, is obviously for folks to get in touch with their senators in their, that they are constituents in whatever the state they're in. But I wonder if you have a point of view on generally who are the lawmakers that maybe are known to be in favor right now of Section 109 on either side of the aisle, and maybe you mentioned Elizabeth Warren. Like, do we have a clear indication of where the attack's coming from, or maybe the attempt to strip this language out? I think you've got on saveourwallets.org, which we'll throw up in a moment. I think you've got quotes from Richie Torres there and Tom Emmer. So there are some lawmakers who are explicitly in favor of it right now. Can you give us a bit of your sense of the landscape here? Who's on the right side?
Yeah, I'll try a little bit. You actually kind of named a few. Gottheimer's another one who's a big proponent in the House. I would say that I want to be a little bit careful to not dox people here on this one. The House tends to be a little bit more public about their opinions because they have more kind of targeted constituencies. They have a better sense of what's going on. They can take stronger opinions. On the Senate side, I can say that we do have a number of strong champions who are supporting this language and telling us that, they are, going to defend this as it moves through, the committee write-up process or markup process. But many of them are timid, let's say, about coming out too strongly in support too early because they don't want to start taking arrows if, they're, too out on the ledge and it's not clear how many of their compatriots in the Senate are going to support it. So I will just say that, we are optimistic. We do think that we have, a majority, and we hope that it's a filibuster-proof majority to be able to move this bill through the Senate. But as you mentioned, the real challenge for the community is just that we have very strong, opponents who are coming after us, right? Like the Elizabeth Warren anti-crypto coalition. They basically do everything they can. I mean, there was a provision in, next year's omnibus bill that they've been debating about doing a study on the impact of crypto and Bitcoin on the U.S. economy and things of this nature. And Elizabeth Warren's staff had it stripped out of the bill, is what we're hearing, right? I mean, they're literally going with a fine-tooth comb through every single bill that's coming through the Senate, and they're just trying to be militantly, in opposition of anything. So I would say that's really the danger, right? If you are somebody who is, in a district where you have a, person who is not supporting this, it's really important that you pick up the phone and call them and make sure that they know that, this is important to you. It's important to, entrepreneurialism and, kind of the economy in the United States. Crypto is going to be the next big technology wave that comes through. And I think the members of Congress who, are a little bit more savvy, they understand that. They can imagine what the United States would look like today as an economy and, in terms of its global power projection without the Mag 7, right? It would be a radically different world. So yeah. I think that there's support for this. It's pretty broad, but the system we have allows one individual senator or a very small handful to really gum up the gears and kind of derail the train for everybody if we're not careful.
Interesting. What comes to mind always with her, it just sort of blows my mind. I mean, stable coins are included in crypto. Treasury wants buyers for their treasuries. Like, even just that alone, the fact that she's so against it, it doesn't take much to sort of understand the role that this plays, whether you agree with stable coins or not, or the way that the government is going to make the stable coins be backed by T-bills. It's just kind of mind blowing to have her be so adamantly against it. It makes me just think that sort of once you establish a stance so strong, you just stick with it. Maybe, I think most people would allow her to sort of back out in a face-saving way. At least people in power. I mean, what people say on Twitter and everything else, can't control that. But I don't know. It's very strange that she would want to play this role at this point. I guess maybe she feels secure in the deep blue state that she's in. But she saw what happened to Sherrod Brown, and I would have to imagine she knows that the same will probably happen to her colleagues. When elections roll around again, if they're in swing states. So quite interesting. But let's not get too far off topic. Anything to sort of wrap it up here? Final CTA, final message. Anything? Anything else important to share?
Yeah, I think here I just want to quote the founding fathers to everybody in the Bitcoin community and say that, eternal vigilance is the cost of liberty, right? We cannot take anything for granted, right? We haven't won anything yet. We were able to influence the outcome of last year's election, and send a pretty positive leaning Congress, into, power for this administration and this term. But there are no laws that have really been passed yet that are, consequential for us, and, in the way that we care about them in the Bitcoin community. And, this is the opportunity. So we need everybody to get on the field. We need everybody to get engaged. As I said before, if everybody picks up the phone and lets their, senators and their Congress people know how important this is to them, and, doesn't take no for an answer. And by the way, be respectful. If you call your congressperson, don't scream at them. Don't be angry. Don't be, belligerent.
Don't call them a shitcoiner.
Don't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
That.
Don't do that. That'll hurt. But, if everybody actually gets involved, we're going to win. And this is actually, a very important moment. For 15, 16 years, as I said, we've been waiting for the culmination of ensconcing these rights into American law. And now is the opportunity. Victory is within reach, but we need everybody to get engaged. So go to saveourwallets.org, sign up for alerts, find your contact information for your Congress people, share the campaign, and defend our right to transact freely.
Beautifully put. Kyle, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Everybody, you heard it here first. Get out there and do your part. Kyle, thank you for doing more than your part. We sincerely appreciate it, and we will be in touch, and we are surely with you in support of what you're doing. So thank you.
Thanks guys. Pleasure to be here.
Take it easy.
Bye.
Could we throw a little bit of there we go.
There we go.
Satoshi needs
Thank you to Kyle, and here we go. Satoshi needs you. This is SaveOurWallets.org. Protect your right to transact freely. Support Section 109 of the Clarity Act. There it is. Go to the website, check it out, find your local representative, and politely let them know how you feel about Section 109.
Also, if you are slightly, it's funny. I still feel my job is a political reporter, and I still feel a little bit intimidated when I call the offices of politicians. So if you do feel intimidated by that, please know that there is a form letter. If you email your elected official, it's not that you have to sort of go find the words. They have found some words for you to email. You just have to click a few buttons, send that email. Literally, you don't even have to copy and paste email addresses or anything. It's all on the Save Our Wallets page. So just something to keep in mind. They make it very easy for you to participate. You could participate probably in a total of less than 5 minutes if you're already sitting in front of your computer.
Yeah. Also, remember, they work for you guys. These
Correct.
They work for you. They are in office by the grace of you and other folks like you, and we pay their salaries, and just get into that mindset, and then go out and harangue them as best you can.
Amen.
Cool. Well, Frank, let's move on to we've got a pretty full slate of stories for the rest of the week.
Yep.
Before we, I guess, get to the news, or external news, a little bit of internal happenings.
Yeah.
At least in
Let's
my
go.
world, the Bitcoin laws world. So this is, I guess, a little bit related to what we were just talking about with Kyle. Bit of an update. I have just launched on Bitcoin laws a couple of days ago. A bit of a new look, a bit of a redesign for some of the pages we've got here, including how all kinds of information is set out on bills and other things. So this is kind of the federal page, and we've got basically a long list of all the bills. But what is really new here, and I'm excited about, is this kind of politicians tab. So now I've got basically the full list of every House and Senate member. And again, this is just the federal page, also coming for the states. But you can kind of click through to then a kind of profile page for every single one of the representatives here. This is Tom Emmer's page. You can see the committees he's on, the bills he's sponsored, and also his voting record. If I just kind of move that up a little bit there too. There we go. Yay, yay, yay. Tom is voting. Yay. So that's it. Go and check it out, folks. If you want to, as I guess on the theme of holding your elected representatives to account, you can see how they have behaved with regards to Bitcoin and digital assets.
Round of applause for Julian here. Amazing work coding all this up and getting this information out there. Just an incredible resource. If you're not using Bitcoin laws already, if you're interested in this stuff, you know the next URL to type into your browser. So bitcoinlaws.io, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, moving on. What do we have in the news this week? We have an announcement for a cross-departmental round table between the SEC and the CFTC about, harmonization of their respective territories. Big theme for what's going on in the world of Bitcoin and digital assets legislation. What can you tell us, Frank, a little bit, a bit more about what's going on?
So a few things. I'll be reporting on this. I will be at this meeting, and I'll be at a special kind of behind-the-scenes meeting with Paul Atkins, SEC chair, on Monday. So you can follow me on X. I'll be doing some live tweeting and report, so long as I believe we're allowed to have our devices with us in the actual event. So the question that I think I want to ask, and I was listening to a conversation on Bits and Bips, which is a show on Laura Shin's Unchained Network. The big question, I think, and it was something that they were discussing, and I don't think anyone knows the answer here, is what does it look like once real-world assets are on chain? Because I don't believe we're going to live in a world where you just have a wallet that does not have your identifying information, or through which your transactions cannot be censored, floating around in the ether where you just have a ton of shares of Tesla on that or something. That's not the world we're moving into. That being said, I think it's fine and maybe good in a lot of ways that the SEC wants to put stocks on blockchain. That's totally fine. I don't like T2 settlement. So like when I have something in my retirement account, I don't like the fact that it takes 2 days for those funds to settle. So using blockchain for funds to settle, that's great. I think, some people seem to be excited about, you'll just be able to trade your Bitcoin for some whatever stock and blah, blah, blah. I don't think it's going to be quite that easy. But I think the bigger issue here is, my worry is that this becomes potentially a backdoor for KYC on all wallets, no matter what the digital assets are. So we don't know what this is going to look like yet. Again, I don't really care that the SEC is putting stuff on blockchain. I think it's good in some ways. It really depends on how much you care about blockchain being used outside of Bitcoin. For me, this is a use case. If people want to do it, that's great. But there's definitely, in my very humble opinion, there's definitely going to be oversight, and I would like to know how members of the SEC are thinking about this. I do think that they are sophisticated. I think Paul Atkins is a pretty ideologically libertarian type guy. I think the same can be said of Hester Pierce, one of the commissioners at the SEC. So part of me says, embedded in their ideology is this idea that Bitcoin is money and that it's different than whatever real world assets come on chain, and maybe it'll be treated differently. But that's part of what I plan to ask him when I speak with him on Monday, or when I'm part of that discussion on Monday. So that's what I'm looking for. Anything on your end, though, Julian? Anything you're sort of looking for in this meeting?
I think it's early to say. I'll be paying attention, but it's, you never really know. I mean, it's one of these events where we got a bunch of industry representatives who, like, if you look at the list, it's like, okay, some of these guys make sense. Others of them, like the CEOs from the prediction market companies, Kalshi and Polymarket and stuff. It's like, I don't want to throw shade at those guys, but it's like, we've seen a number of these panel type events where it's like, is there just kind of quid pro quo for, contributing to campaigns and stuff that gets you a seat on some of these gab fests, and then how much substantive action is going to come out of it. Yep. So I don't know. We'll see.
That's a great point. Those were actually the two people I looked at as well. And I kind of got a little bit nervous because I believe I've never used either. I look at them, I see what people are betting on, but I've never actually placed a bet on Polymarket or Kalshi. But again, I look at that and say like, well, Kalshi I think is totally KYC, whereas Polymarket isn't. And it's like, why wouldn't they want both to be the same, especially for, they would want to collect data on who's betting on what and what their political beliefs are. Not that that's right. I'm not saying that's right, but why wouldn't they want to try to collect that, I guess, is my thought. So I think there's going to be a lot to pay attention to in this meeting. I don't know, again, how substantive it'll be. I don't know what rulemaking, quote unquote, looks like. Things still need to get legislated, but people are going to be putting ideas out into the ether. Those ideas can sort of become something else in other places. And I just want to sort of watch what those ideas are and take some notes
that have really nothing to do with Bitcoin, right?
Right.
Could be completely unrelated. Anyway, we will see. Moving on, something that was more directly related to Bitcoin. It was a story from this week where Bitcoin circular economies got a shout out at the United Nations from PayStand CEO and co-founder Jeremy Armand. What can you tell us about this?
This was fantastic to see. So I used to work for the United Nations in Namibia. I did work with the Ministry of Education in Namibia many moons ago. And I also did work creating online classes on totally unrelated stuff. Like it was on early childhood development. I was a teacher in a past life. And so UN,
Frank, in so many ways.
That's right. Yeah, I guess so. UN, I have mixed feelings about the UN. I know a lot of people who work for it that do really good work. I also think it's a huge bureaucracy. And as much as they sort of say they're paying attention to what's happening at the grassroots level, I think there's plenty of egos involved and a lot of top-downness or top-down dictates or whatever that still happen there. And it's stunning to me that 17 years into Bitcoin's existence, it's still not really part of the conversation here. Digital assets is, and this panel was a panel on digital assets. The person sitting next to Jeremy, the one male, and actually there's two males. So the male, if you're looking at the picture closest to the right with his hands in the air, Jeremy spoke very specifically about Bitcoin in this broader conversation around digital assets. I think he did a great job and he was respectful. The person sitting next to him to his right, so to the left, if you're looking at the picture, I think is the COO of Circle, who's the issuer of USDC. And she said something quite overwhelming to me, or quite stunning. She was like, yeah, Circle is great because we can just sort of, dictate whether people use their money on like food or whether they're using it for gambling. And I was just like, did you just say that out loud? Like, did you? He very quickly sort of said, well, Bitcoin is freedom money, that we don't have any sort of restrictions over what you can use it on. But I think his point was that what's amazing about Bitcoin is that so much of what's happening in the circular economies is happening at the grassroots level. So it doesn't even take a ton of effort from policymakers, government officials, or whatever to support this. It's almost like just create policy where you leave these things alone to exist and to flourish, and for Bitcoin to not only sort of enter these communities, but a lot of the educational resources that often come with Bitcoin adoption, as well as companies that come in and maybe start offering jobs in this space, like he gave the example of in Bitcoin Beach, some of the work they've done with educating the students, the kids in the town, has led to some of them getting internships with larger Bitcoin mining companies. So he's sort of saying like, this is sort of taking care of itself. We should be paying attention to it. There's a lot to learn from it. I also had a conversation with Jeremy both that day before the panel, and I just did a podcast episode with him. Jeremy's one of these figures that's sort of working in the background. He's not really loud online or anything, but he's doing really, really amazing work in donating to great programs, not only like Bitcoin Beach and the circular economies, but Bitcoin Dada, program for African women that helps them to learn about Bitcoin. He contributes to My First Bitcoin, which is the largest grassroots educational platform for Bitcoin out there. He does really, really cool work. I'll quote my producer for Bitcoin Politics. He was sitting in on the conversation I had with Jeremy, and he was like, hands down, he was like, that was hands down my favorite interview I've seen you do yet. That guy is wild and he's cool. It's sort of like a dime. He's just out there doing this thing, having a tremendous impact. He's only recently become a little bit more vocal about it because he wants to start engaging with leaders about it more publicly, saying, There's been somewhat of a blueprint in El Salvador of Bukele paying attention to what happened in Bitcoin Beach and then crafting broader policy around it. And you could feel the way you want to feel about Bukele. He doesn't really get into that too much, but there is a model there of someone saying, hey, this thing is working on a community level. Maybe we should pay a little bit more attention to it. And I very much endorse this message. And I'm glad that someone like Jeremy is out there having these conversations with global leaders.
Great. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. It's like you can kind of joke about the UN and often it's easy to do that and to just kind of dismiss some of these, insular bureaucratic processes and panels on whatever else. But
right,
you'd rather be in the room than not be, particularly when it's issues that pertain to something you care about, right? So if and when Bitcoin and digital assets are discussed in places like the UN, you want to have strong representatives from the community in there. So it's great to see.
100%. A last final thing I'll say, the woman who puts on the Concordia Summit, which is like a summit that goes on during UN General Assembly Week. So a lot of people that are there for General Assembly also come over to this summit. You could think about it almost like a satellite event of the General Assembly Week. She watched Jeremy speak and was just like, why haven't I ever heard about this before? So sometimes we attribute to malice what's actually just like a lack of education or exposure. And she said to him, like, do you know anyone in New York that would be able to moderate panels like this? That's really kind of like a Bitcoin specialist that would be more able to do this on a regular basis. He recommended that I do it. So it's like sometimes you just need to be there and say, hey, there's this really cool thing happening. Maybe you should be paying attention and just maybe assume that, yeah, maybe they just haven't had the exposure to that yet and that they are sort of acting in good faith. And they do, if it really is something that's working, they do want to help highlight that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, moving on, kind of quickly through this one in the agenda. Yeah. It's on the surface over the last couple of days, but some news that the SEC and FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Agency, I believe, are now looking into suspicious stock trading activity pertaining to crypto treasury companies. We don't have a ton of detail on this yet, but it's reporting from the Wall Street Journal basically just saying that there's been some observation of some potentially suspiciously timed trades preceding announcements of treasury company buys and listings and other things too. I guess I don't know if you've heard any kind of rumors circulating. Obviously, I should say full disclosure, like we're somewhat conflicted here. This is a show being distributed by Bitcoin Magazine, BTC Inc. This has nothing to do with BTC Inc. or Nakamoto, I should say.
Yeah.
This is about all the news that we have, but I guess just kind of disclosing that. And then other than that, any thoughts or maybe behind the scenes kind of rumors circulating that you might be aware of?
I saw a facetious tweet about like governments looking for like budget neutral ways to acquire Bitcoin. Maybe you penalize these companies for this and get some of it. I don't know. That's a real stretch, but yeah, I will say this. I will very much say I don't know everything that happens behind the scenes at Nakamoto, and I'm definitely not insinuating anything by saying that. But David, with us at BTC Inc. and the staff has been like deeply explicit about not buying Naka until we have permission from the SEC. So like deeply. Also,
deeply I saw David came out in response to this news and said this is great. Like there should be this investigation should be happening. It's a good thing. So there are like anything, there are good operators in space and probably a bunch of treasury companies, by the way, that we haven't even heard of, right? Who are kind of scheming their way into suspect operations. Pumping their bags. I guess I'll just say, I don't know if we joked about this off air or if it was last time we spoke on air last week, but the vibes aren't great. I'm just going to put that out there. Like the treasury company vibes aren't great. And like, I just, who knows what's going to happen? But it's almost funny that like all of this, like this stuff to me that's coming out right now, it's like late bull market or even like bear market type news that like late cycle, end of cycle stuff that you often like inevitably you're going to see it, right? Because there's going to be a bull run, it's going to be all this crazy mania, and then we're going to find out after the fact that there were some people doing dodgy things. But it's just,
Right.
I find it not to make anybody feel worse if you've got money tied up in underperforming equities right now. But it's like, we haven't even had the big bull run, you know? It's like the house of cards is already falling apart before it's even begun, before the fun's even started. So
yeah, it's between that and I'm not going to get into this, but between that and the not stuff, it's just like I need a vacation. I don't want to do this anymore. Like I need to go do something else. We're not going to get into that. At least I'm not going to get into that today.
I don't think we can. I don't think we should. Other than I will say this. Kyle Torpy, I don't know if you know that Kyle, who he's kind of Bitcoin has been around for a while. I don't want to scoop him. I think, well, I'm not gonna spoil his thunder, but we were kind of chatting about some of the legal issues that are being debated inside this whole NOTS thing. Nothing to do with the technical, well, it's related to the technical side of things, but this idea that illicit material is going to be like circulated on blockchains by node runners, and this could, in theory, put people in a position of liability for just running a node. And is this FUD? Is this a real thing? Right. I'll just briefly comment on it because I did some research and thought about it as this conversation was coming up.
And you're a lawyer, for those who don't
right.
know. You're yeah.
I'll just say this. I guess for anybody that's out there thinking about this, like, I think it's mostly FUD, but it's hypothetically real. Like,
okay.
It's very, very complicated. I almost don't want to talk about it live, other than to say, like, when you're looking at these debates happening on a platform like X, and you're asking yourself, how seriously should I take this issue, or how seriously should I take this person who's making this argument or making this case? There are like object level, like issue level concerns, like, is this factually correct? Is this a real risk? And then there are like meta level concerns as well, like, is this argument being made in good faith? Is it being overemphasized? Is it actually masking the true intentions of someone who has a different agenda? And I won't say I have any answers to that. I will just say that my gut instinct is, when you're talking about stuff like explicit material and like CSAM on blockchains, on the Bitcoin blockchain, to me, it feels like it's overestimated, overblown, and almost hysterical to a degree that says to me, it's not the real agenda. Like, that's not the primary concern here, you know? And I think anybody that's following the NOTS debate knows that it's bigger than that. But yeah, maybe I'll just kind of leave it at that. I will actually say, because it relates to other things we talk about on this show, that I think the real issue is not whether or not some little technical change puts us as, let's say, Bitcoin node runners over a threshold of liability. The real issue is the political side of things. Like, and this is what I said to Kyle offline. At any point in time, you could have a hostile politician pick up a political narrative and run with it to attack Bitcoin.
No question. No
right?
question.
And we actually see that all the time. You know, Elizabeth Warren and other people talking about, Hamas getting paid in cryptocurrency or whatever. And like, there might be a grain of truth in it, but you know that it's really an overblown political attack. And so my point of view mostly is that there's always a risk of that happening, whether or not there's, regardless of some threshold technical concern over, meeting the definition of possession of illicit material or something else. I don't know. I just feel like that's it's a bit of a red herring, right? Really, what you want to do is you want to protect the rights of Bitcoiners in a much more substantive and holistic way, such that you can't have kind of capricious, politically motivated individuals, picking up a cudgel whenever they feel like it and just coming at it as a Bitcoiner. So I don't know, that's kind of how I feel about it.
I'm going to do one comment and then I'm done. Yeah, I went on a space after the news that Lola broke yesterday came out. I'm not commenting on that or whatever. I went on a space and just said simply, it's making my job harder. The arguments, because you're going out there and you're trying to make sure that, people don't propose OFAC sanctioned blocks or other things that would be in the realm of censorship. And it's like, and it's the only reason I even started weighing in on it. It's like, it's making my job harder. Like, I'm trying to have conversations about people being able to use this privately, permissionlessly, all this stuff. And it's just like, this is not helping. And I'll leave it at that. That's all I'll say. I'm not being prescriptive in what you should do or what note you should run. That's totally up to you. I'm a freedom maximalist on that front. Please do what feels best to you.
Yeah. Well said. Okay, let's move on. Next story. This kind of went under the radar, I think. But the ongoing legal drama between Donald Trump and Lisa Cook, Fed board member, and her firing, and whether or not that's legal, and is she going to be reinstated pending, an assessment of whether or not she can actually be fired. There's a lot of back and forth that we've discussed over the past few weeks. So this week, another amicus brief was filed in this case, co-signed by every living former Fed chair. Like a super team of central bankers, past central bankers, Alan, Greenspan, Yellen, Bernanke, everybody's kind of got together and signed this, co-written and signed this amicus brief in support of Lisa Cook, right? And it's a fascinating document, and I recommend that anybody who's interested in the Fed at all, which is probably most Bitcoiners, go and have a read of it, because it's mostly not about this Lisa Cook thing. It's mostly not. What it is, a lot of it is a first principles argument for central banking and for the independence of the Fed from the perspective of the most powerful practitioners of the art in the history of it, right?
That's fascinating.
So,
that's fascinating.
Like, all of these, first principles arguments on maintaining the independence of the Federal Reserve is essential for a healthy economy. So, and so on and so forth. I recommend Bitcoiners go and read it, just for that reason. If you're curious and you got a few minutes to spend, and maybe we'll post the link somewhere too. I kind of have one comment on it, which obviously, like, I'm a Bitcoiner. I don't think I need to kind of keep reiterating that for people, but there is a persuasive argument that runs through this, just on this Fed independence question. And I guess if anybody's watched the past few episodes of the show, maybe I'm going to start to sound schizophrenic, because I think I've passionately argued in favor of having more political accountability and democratic accountability for the Fed. But this brief makes the case, the essential point, that, hey, if the Fed is not independent from political constraints and demands, what's going to happen is, and this is paraphrasing, what's going to happen is people are just going to vote for more money printing. Like, people are going to vote for money. That's what's going to happen. And they point to other examples of political pressure being exerted on central banks in Turkey and other places. President Erdogan in Turkey just basically went to the central bank and said, you have to cut the rates, slash them right down, because I said so. And of course they did, and then boom, hyperinflation. So I'm somewhat sympathetic to this idea that that mob is maybe a bit derogatory, but like mass sentiment about these ideas in a passionate, expressed in like the passionate will of the people, is kind of dangerous if you give people kind of hand on the lever of monetary policy. Now, of course, as Bitcoiners, we might say precisely that's why nobody should be able to do that, right? But living in a world in which we do, where there is a tiller and someone's hand is on it, in that world, I think we it's a nuanced subject, and they make a good case about why giving it up is
dangerous,
risky at least. So anyway, that's what I'll say about that.
Cool. Yeah, very cool. I didn't see that this week. That's super interesting.
Okay, well, something you did see, because you produced it, is interview with Hash.
Hash,
just goes by Hash, about inside the Nepal Revolution, BitChat and Freedom Tech. So I've got this kind of queued up to one part of the conversation here, which we'll maybe riff on for further discussion. But before I do that, maybe you want to just kind of plug the conversation in general.
Yeah, I'm a big, so whenever I see there's lots of Bitcoin adoption, or in this case, there's a lot of BitChat adoption, I always want to dig in deeper. And for some context on that, I used to have a podcast where I would, speak with people from the Bitcoin circular economies about how real the adoption was on the ground and what it was actually fixing. And oftentimes I got very nuanced views, and it depended from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, place to place, all that stuff. And the reason I wanted to it took me a long time to find someone who was willing to talk about what happened in Nepal. Most people on the ground would not talk about it. And I get why, potential backlash from authorities, even though it seems like they've dispelled all the bad authorities after the revolution there. But I I reached out to Hash, who is one of the people who puts on the MIT Freedom Tech Expo. So I spoke at that this year. And he's also an alumnus of the MIT Bitcoin Club, generally speaking, a very smart guy, and also is from a village in India, or from a region in India that borders Nepal, has been to Nepal many times, had a lot of friends on the ground. So he spoke on their behalf. He did put me in touch with some of his friends who shared some info with me, but they weren't willing to go on camera. So this was sort of the best I could do. I think you have the part queued up. I think it might be worth listening to what he says here. It's not long. I think it's just a few sentences.
Just a couple of sentences,
yeah. Let's give it a listen real quick.
Let's get into it. Okay, well, so that was, I don't know if you wanted me to play anymore, but I think that was kind of the gist of the key point here. What, I guess, what's your immediate takeaway there?
So I think I know this part. I still can't hear when you play these, so
right.
I'm just, yeah.
Okay.
I know the part.
So, okay, so the question was, and I think our viewers and listeners got it, but for you, Frank, the question was, what about, you have these activist friends, are they using Bitcoin? What do they think about Bitcoin? And then Hash's answer is, well, they're not using Bitcoin. And in fact, often activists don't like Bitcoin, I think he said, because they are maybe progressive, and then kind of left-leaning activists see it as basically, I think, is a capitalistic tool. Right?
Yeah, an extension, something to sort of, there's a lot of people on the left. It made me think a lot. There's tons of, we're all obviously living in our silos these days, or whatever social media we're using, or whatever enclave we're in within some social media channel, platform. And you see people on the left often talk about this idea of like late stage capitalism. And obviously something like Bitcoin would make it so that quote unquote late stage capitalism cannot happen permanently, kind of does away with the idea of late stage capitalism. But I would add some nuance to this. I think Bitcoin is bigger than capitalism. I think it's a bit, so that's like saying you can't have socialism with hard money. So it's like, or you can't have, let's say, a progressive taxation scheme with hard money. You can have, something that resembles more of the left. You can't, I think one of the things that Bitcoin does away with is crony capitalism, which is what most people have an issue with, in my very humble opinion. Not saying that capitalism in and of itself is perfect. I personally prefer it. That's my take. But it's interesting because what really sort of stuck with me here, and I didn't have a chance to write this piece, is like, one, I feel kind of sad because you're missing some of the other dimensions, things that Bitcoin offers, which is some level of financial privacy, permissionlessness. I think in Broken Money, Lynn Alden says, like, if you really want to understand the value of Bitcoin, think about, the people who you don't like being in charge and being able to freeze your money. So like if you don't like Trump, for say, if we were living under a CBDC system, and Trump were to say, I don't like what this person said on social media, I'm freezing their funds. That's why Bitcoin exists. It's not just to preserve a market economy. It's more than that. But I think also just this idea that so many people on the left have just got to a point where capitalism is evil. It makes me think like, there was even a part of me, and I don't mean to be cynical here, but it's like, why are we even trying to court the left? If they're so dug in on this, it's like we're trying to make this case for why this is valuable. But if that's their first, the first thought that comes to mind is this is just preserving capitalism, and they're not thinking about it. It just made me think. It's like, made me think, not necessarily, again, to become more cynical, but like strategically, how are we not approaching this? We don't seem to be doing a great job of approaching this well. And one of the reasons I write about Bitcoin circular economies for Forbes and try to tell that story is because I think it's pretty undeniable that financial inclusion is a good thing, and that people having access to Bitcoin and permissionless finance and money, whatever, is a good thing. For the record, I don't know if I've mentioned it on this show. I got word that the BBC picked up a story in this informal settlement in Africa called Kibera. I wrote a piece on it for Forbes. I went to this informal settlement, which is a nicer way to put a slum, a very poor area of Africa. It's actually within the city limits of Nairobi, Kenya. The BBC did like a 4-minute piece on it, and I heard from the head of the project, it's called Afribit Kibera, that they had read my Forbes article, and their interest got piqued about this. So I'm in this place where I'm hopeful that we can appeal to the hearts and minds of people who are a bit more liberal, capital L, liberal to the left politically. But I realize just how much work we have to do. I'm grateful for the likes of Trey, for the progressive Bitcoiner, for going to have certain conversations and highlighting other use cases for Bitcoin. Again, I really don't get how Democrats don't see the activist use case for Bitcoin, but I think that there generally seems to be this feeling of like the government will fix it. And I guess that what hit me hard about that is like, oh, that extends all the way to Nepal. Like that's not just like a US feeling or a European thing. And it's just made me think like we really need to kind of think about our messaging with this stuff, because a lot of the Bitcoin, the foundations of it, you had a lot of anarcho-capitalist, libertarian supporters, and that's fine. I learned a lot from those schools of thought. I've taken what I've liked from those schools of thought and incorporated into my own school of thought. I don't consider myself to be either one of those two things, but there are some tenets of both of those schools of thought that I think are interesting and that I do believe in. But yeah, it's not a big deal, but it was just something that was said in passing that kind of lingered. It didn't leave me for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Look, I don't think people don't really tune in to get to hear about what my political views are in a general sense. But look, I think I totally agree with you that there is all the work ahead of the left and let's say the Bitcoin left to, I think, persuasively make the case that Bitcoin is a progressive technology at all. I'm personally unpersuaded by most of those arguments. Well-intentioned as they are, I've heard them. I see a lot of these kind of progressive Bitcoiner arguments, and to me, and I don't want to strawman them or denigrate them at all, but it's got a bit of a flavor to me of saying, well, there are things that we like that are abstract terms, justice, financial inclusion. And we're going to call those progressive things, and therefore, because we've called them progressive things, and Bitcoin favors those things, therefore Bitcoin is somehow a progressive technology. I'm kind of unpersuaded by a lot of the groundwork of those arguments, right? Like, the Trump family was motivated very much by financial inclusion to become pro Bitcoin, right? So there's nothing progressive about that,
that's fair.
I personally don't think, which is not to say that you can't make the argument. And I think the arguments should be, it's imperative that, I suppose, everybody hears the Bitcoin gospel, right? In whatever way suits them. I just think that the arguments thus far have largely been unpersuasive. And look, if I had to have a take on part of the reason why that is, it's like, I don't think the political left cares very much for activists in a general sense. There's no sense in like activists, quote unquote, are like part of. No, it's like, are you a member of a politically valuable constituency and progressing that particular cause? And if the answer is no, then you're not useful to that political movement.
That's
right?
fair. That's fair.
So look, I have plenty more cynical things to say as well. But we won't get too far down the rabbit hole. But I just think that's part of it, right? Make that, Bitcoin it's inherently easier to make the case on the conservative side. I think that's indisputable, and I think that's why Bitcoin has had so much more adoption on that side of politics, right?
Yep, that's fair.
It's much easier to make the case for traditionally conservative both values and policy goals, whether it's fiscal conservatism or just the idea that maybe you're not into the idea of like expropriating money and redistributing it, right? That's what central banking does better than anything else. So there's a very natural right-wing flavor to that part of Bitcoin. Not to say that the progressive side can't make their case too, but I think that, as I said, the work is ahead of them to do that.
And I think it's a very, I was talking with Jeff Booth about this. I think it feels very theoretical. It's like with Jeff's argument with what you just said about expropriating money, redistributing it. Jeff is like, yeah, but to do that through inflation, you have to first steal from those people. And I get theoretically, I get that point. So he's like, if the money was just worth more, maybe, or in his opinion, you wouldn't have to do that. But we don't know that that's a fact. We don't know that that's 100% true. I subscribe to that on some level, but I don't know that I subscribe to that 100%. I think it seems generally like a good thing that people's money maintains value, but we don't know what the world would look like on a Bitcoin standard, what sort of negatives could come out of that, if any. I mean, maybe it is kumbaya, utopia world. I have no idea. I'm not trying to hold that back, but I do try to think like usually nothing is a perfect fix. And, I wouldn't be writing about politics if I didn't think that there was going to be I don't think politics will ever fully go away. I don't think the efforts to redistribute money will ever go away, whether right or wrong. So it's just kind of, it's worth, I'll sum this up by saying, I don't think Bitcoin fixes everything. I don't think just having perfect money automatically fixes everything. It might fix much more than I'm even giving it credit for. I just don't think that incorporates everything. And therefore I think politics will remain a part of our lives.
Yeah. Well said. And I guess as we kind of come up to the end of the show, it's maybe a bit of time for a bit of reflection. And it's funny because I have been reflecting over the past couple of days, and I promise it's not just because I'm bearish because the price has gone down. But I think I have been wrong for sure about many predictions related to Bitcoin over the past few years, and I think frankly many people in this space have been too. Right?
Yeah.
If you've been online at all from 2022 onwards, I mean, it was consensus that everything was going to crash. Rates had to come down. The clock was ticking. We had a matter of months, and Jerome Powell had to act. Otherwise, the financial system is going to implode. All this macro doom and gloom that we've been as I said, inundated with for 3 years.
Yep.
And none of it has come to pass. None of it. And it was like very, very vociferously and almost kind of consensus opinion, and so there's a part of me that, hey, am I just suddenly becoming a Fed simp? I don't know, Frank. You could please hold me to account if this is happening, but like, you got to call balls and strikes, and I think
agreed.
Bitcoin doesn't fix everything, and I think, by the way, if you'll allow me the license to expand on this idea a little bit more. Yeah. To some degree, that's the theme of what we are talking about here. Like, we're talking about the complexity and the nuance of what happens when Bitcoin collides with the real world and political institutions. How do you manage that integration? And then the rubber really has to start hitting the road. It's not textbooks anymore. It's not Twitter threads. It's like, how do we actually get this done, and what does that look like? And I would say it's a good thing. It's a positive thing that necessarily we move into this world of nuance and trying to figure that out, and coming to grips with the idealism that has propelled Bitcoin to this point. And building new scaffolding onto that, and sometimes saying, hey, like, the real world demands different things of us now. So.
Yeah, agreed, 100%. The only thing I would say to your point about the Fed and no tragedy having happened since late or whatever 2022 is I would say that I would call what happened in 2023 was bank bailouts. I would say that those were actual bailouts on some level. So I think that the Fed did paper over some things. If they had just let things play out in 2023, I think that cascade would have led to something much worse. It's whether or not you agree with the Fed stepping in and papering over it. I'm not even here to make that argument, to be honest. It just is what it is. So I think that, I think that's just worth noting. But at the same time, I think your broader point around when people in this space tend to come to consensus, and I would say that consensus right now is like the melt up is on the way. There's no chance we're not going higher, and through November or whatever like that, or very little chance. There's a little part of me that's like, what if we just go down? What is that going to do to people's psyches? Are people just going to break? Like, are they going to completely melt down? Personally, I'm not, because I actually think that there's something really important happening. So if you are a Bitcoin maximalist and you don't think anything else has value, the fact that Ethereum and Sol essentially didn't go to new time highs compared to the last, bull run, that's actually bullish for Bitcoin if you really break it down. So like, if you want to try to like put a little silver lining on the fact that this wasn't maybe all the bull market we were hoping it was going to be, on some level, it does some damage to the collective psyche of the broader crypto complex, at least as it pertains to investing. I've seen, like, I was on the Milk Road podcast the other day, and I've seen some people from that world and some people from the other broader crypto spaces sort of venting their frustrations around, like, every time it looks like ETH is going to break new time highs or Sol is going to do what it's doing, they're only barely cracking what they did in 2021 and 2021. So I think there's something there, Bitcoin is trading at, twice what it was trading at essentially after 2020. Well, maybe a little bit under twice, but, close to twice what it was trading at if we look at the all-time highs, whereas these other assets didn't even reach all-time highs. If I were invested in those other assets, I would think twice about holding them long-term after what I saw in this bull market.
Yeah, agreed. The landscape is changing for sure. And I suppose, yes, to go to your prior point about when consensus forms, it reminds me actually of a kind of a line from Christopher Hitchens, who was kind of a journalist and writer that I admired a lot growing up. And it's kind of a funny line where he's talking about how dangerous kind of consensus can be. Basically, this is paraphrasing, but he's like, two of the most dangerous words you can hear put together is bipartisan support. Like, that's when you should be most suspicious. It was kind of a pithy line in a different context, but it's always good to keep that in the back of your mind whenever you start seeing consensus forming, if you can, to not get too swept up in it. Including now when everyone is probably hyper bearish too. So it goes both ways.
1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. Stack sats. If you really need to, maybe borrow against it. Don't try to time the top of the market. My very humble advice. I mean, if you've been investing throughout the bear market, you're still doing very well. Bitcoin was trading at $15,500 less than 3 years ago. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, everybody, stay safe. Stack sats.
Let's go.
And with that, I suppose we'll do the same, Frank. We will do the same, and we will be back here same time next week. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Any other shout outs, Frank, or call it a day?
That's great. This was a great rip. Thanks to Kyle for joining us. I'm just enjoying the fact that I think we're getting better at this. So I appreciate your work, Julian, and thank you to all the people tuning in. Yeah.
Thanks everybody. All right, we will see you next time. Bye for now.
Take it easy.